Great. Okay, so it's 12 o'clock, top of the hour. Let's make a start. Start with a little bit of Teams bingo. Can you all see my screen? I know the answer is yes, because we're using Teams. So my session is on Microsoft Teams Enterprise Voice Made Easy. It's a deep dive into voice with Teams. Again, I'm going to be talking through all of the direct routing stuff, not necessarily anything to do with SBCs themselves. I'll assume you can go out and set up your SBCs. There's a lot of vendors that are supported, and the list is being added to fairly frequently. My name is Randy Chapman. For those that don't know me, I'm a Microsoft MVP for Office Apps and Services, specializing in Microsoft Teams. My history goes back to the kind of OCS days, tail end of OCS R2, beginning with Link 2010. I started doing deployments. Did that for a little while before I became a full-time architect about 6 years ago. You can catch me if you want to ask a question. I do answer questions when I can. Randy@ucstatus.com. I blog at ucstatus.com. Also, I've got a podcast on there. It's a UC Status podcast. You can catch me on Spotify and all the other popular platforms. I'm at Randy Chapman on Twitter, and I work at Enable It, a voice specialist or voice and meeting specialist here in the UK. Right, so a little bit of a session agenda. So I'm going to go through the voice options in Teams. I'm going to talk about what direct routing actually is and what you need, the configuration steps, some stuff about auto attendance and call queues, and the configuration steps, a little bit of a cheat walkthrough video, and then a little bit of a wrap up and summary. So the voice options in Teams. Teams is, sorry, somebody's just come off mute. You can hear some scraping or something. Thank you very much. Teams is called the hub for teamwork. It's a bit of an overused term, to be frank, but it really is. It's Teams is instant messaging. Its equivalent is chat. It's persistent chat, which is the kind of teamwork in channel-based conversations. Obviously, the meeting experience, which we're in now, you can say is pretty unrivaled. Doesn't steal all of your data and send it off to other places. You know what I'm talking about. And of course, it has the ability to take over and become a PBX. Teams is the kind of base of the platform, but the PBX features is something called phone system, previously called Cloud PBX. But Microsoft being Microsoft, they love a name change. To get dial tone in Teams, you've got a couple of options. The first is a Microsoft calling plan. So calling plans is Microsoft's attempt at becoming a global telco. They did actually have ambitious plans to have calling plans available all over the world, but they realized that it was pretty hard to do that. So they decided to kind of stop. And I think the current country count is about 11. So some of Europe, Australia, Canada, and the US, UK, of course, and a few other places besides. And some of the countries are actually provided by service providers in those countries. So like ThinkTel and that kind of thing. What calling plans are is basically it's a license add-on to the phone system license, which is an add-on to Teams, and it enables dial tone, but it also gives you a bundle of minutes that you can use, kind of like a 1997 mobile phone contract. Some people think they're expensive or inflexible. Some people think you're paying for too much and you're not getting enough, but I'll leave that for you to decide. The other way, of course, is to set up something called direct routing, and to me this is the genius of what became the kind of new normal for voice in Teams. Go back to Skype Online, the kind of multi-tenanted version of Skype for Business Server that Microsoft hosts in Microsoft 365, and to get voice into that you needed Skype for Business Server on-prem somewhere, and that could either be a full Skype for Business server platform, with an edge and a front end and all those kind of roles, or it could be what's called Cloud Connector Edition. Again, that could be standalone, or it could be as a virtual instance running on a session border controller or gateway. So when you add phone system and then you pair Teams with calling plan or direct routing, it becomes a full enterprise calling platform. And it's capable of reaching global scale. Thankfully, largely by the wonderful network we all call the content delivery network that Microsoft hosts. It means that you're never too far away from an ingress into Teams, and you can easily get voice out. A relatively small company, a few hundred users using Teams for voice, but I've heard of companies out there, sort of multiple hundreds of thousands of users using Teams for voice. So it does genuinely scale far beyond what a lot of other platforms can do, and quite easy besides. So what is direct routing? So it's a little bit of a diagram from an old blog post. You got the Teams user on the left, you got Teams with phone system in the middle, and then you got an internet connection. So what you need is a session border controller, or SBC, and that can be connected to a telco, so your SIP lines, your ISDN lines, that kind of thing, or it can be connected to an on-prem PBX. A lot of people don't actually, sort of consider the fact that you can actually, if you wanted to make a phone call, you don't have to phone somebody's mobile number or a PSTN number. You can also phone a desk phone from a legacy PBX on your prem. So you might have a use case where you got users that are using an application or a contact center or something that's very ingrained and embedded, or maybe the PBX provides a feature that is used by the vast majority of staff. You can connect that session border controller as kind of the monkey in the middle, if you like, between the Teams world or the Teams user themselves and the PBX world. And of course, you can connect to a telco, so that could be, whatever is capable of being connected to your session border controller. Analog lines, ISDN lines, or of course SIP. So what do you need for direct routing to make it work? So of course you need Teams licensing. So for Teams, Teams is actually included in pretty much every SKU for what's now called Microsoft 365. I know, again, another rebrand as of today. Office 365 becomes Microsoft 365. It's available on all the business SKUs, the enterprise SKUs, academic, government, and what you get in some of these things kind of differs a little bit, particularly in the government GCC. But sort of check the latest documentation to find out what's available. You need an add-on called Phone System. So it's an add-on to things like F1, E1, the A and G equivalents, but it's included with E5. E5 is the top level SKU for Microsoft 365. It includes everything: Power BI, some fantastic security stuff, but also all the stuff that's included in E3. E5 also comes with, or you can buy it with and without the audio conferencing add-on, which I won't be covering in this session, but it's a good way to get kind of all you can eat dial-in conferencing into your Teams meetings. And what's new as well is something that came out late last year is something called Business Voice. And Business Voice is a SKU that's kind of an add-on that is designed for companies of less than 300 users. So if you have an Office 365 tenant or Microsoft 365 tenant with less than 300 users, you can add the Business Voice add-on. And there's two ways to consume this. So there's actually two versions. So there's one that includes a calling plan. It's phone system, audio conferencing, and a calling plan for domestic only, and then you can add international if you want. But the other version is designed for direct routing. So it's available through cloud solutions providers or CSPs, licensing providers, that kind of thing. And it doesn't include a calling plan. It's just the phone system and the audio conferencing, and it's a slightly cheaper way of actually buying both of those add-ons than actually buying them separately. And more importantly, what Business Voice also adds is the ability to add phone system to the business plans. So this is the what was called Business Essentials and Business Premium. Now it's called Business Basic, Business Standard, and Microsoft 365 Business, which now I think is called Business Premium. So you can add the Business Voice add-on to the previously unseen licenses when it came to phone system, and I thought that was a big mistake on Microsoft's part, kind of not being able to give telephony to companies just because they chose a slightly cheaper license than the enterprise things, and sort of doubling or tripling your license cost just so you can add phone system on was a bit of a barrier for some, and now you can add that. Also important to note is the Business Voice SKU can be added on to E1, E3, F1, that kind of stuff as well. So if you've got the bigger license plans, but you're still sub 300 users, then you can sort of save a little bit of money by adding the Business Voice SKU instead of buying separately the phone system and audio conferencing license. You need a session border controller or a gateway. So this is that monkey in the middle that connects your PBX or your lines to the Teams world. It can be on premises or in the cloud, or it can be hosted and managed by a service provider. You need some lines, of course, and then you need the Teams client. And direct routing is, it's not exclusive. You don't have to have a specific client or anything like that. When you log into Teams, it's always up to date, but you can use it in, on the desktop version, the browser version, so Chrome or Edge, old Edge, and the new Chromium Edge are the ones that work best, and you can use those as full telephony clients. You can also make calls from the Microsoft Teams rooms, Teams conference phones, you can see, Teams desk phones, and of course the Teams mobile client on iOS and Android or tablets and that kind of thing. And you need an internet connection. That's pretty much it. And the recommendation, if you go back to I think it was Martin's session about networking, or was it Craig's session? Probably both. The recommendation is to get to the internet as quick as possible, because you're going to reduce the friction between yourself and the Microsoft Teams content delivery network. So any internet connection will do. I've had Teams meetings and Teams calls from, sort of McDonald's free Wi-Fi and that kind of thing. 4G, top end of 3G kind of works as well. What else do you need? So you need a real domain. So you can't use the onmicrosoft.com thing. You actually have to own a domain, which is fine because that's tied to certificates and things. You need a public DNS record to point the point Teams at your SBC. So in my case, I've got an example there of sbc.ucstatus.com. The public SSL certificate. So it's not a private certificate issued by your on-prem certificate authority. This is from somebody reputable like DigiCert, who are rock stars in the certificate world. And you need some SIP signaling and firewall ports. So the recommendation generally is to put your so that question really quickly as I'm saying it, wildcard will work on your certificate as long as the sbc.domain.com is in the SAN list. I've got a wildcard on my my SBCs, and of course you need these signaling and firewall ports. So I'm not a security expert or a networking expert by any stretch, but so to make sure that you work with your networking and security team to make sure these ports are actually open inbound and outbound. The recommendation generally by SBC vendors is to put the external interface of the SBC actually out as a public address or in a DMZ. You can actually use them through NAT. There's some detailed instructions from Microsoft on how to do that. You need the to set it up. You also need the online, Skype Online PowerShell module. I'll assume you've already got that. You need an account with sufficient rights. So the Teams admin role will do, but global admin obviously will give you a bit more. So what are the configuration steps of direct routing? So first, obviously, you need to connect to the Skype Online PowerShell module. So this is kind of how I connect. I don't use modern auth or multi-factor right now, and it's probably a bad thing. However, my excuse is that I've got Microsoft Teams rooms hanging off my tenant, and Microsoft Teams rooms don't yet support modern auth. Graham session just a moment ago, I know that Crestron are in the tap, so they'll see code coming down before anybody else. He had an example there of a toggle that enabled modern auth, which is great. It means that as soon as modern auth is supported on my Microsoft Teams room, then I'll be changing up and using modern auth with MFA, probably using Authenticator app or something like that. But this is how you could do it just using normal kind of passwords. The top line just saves a password as a secure string, so it's a big text block about this big that is encrypted, and then you just pass some credentials in and some variables and connect to your session. Pretty easy. Just save that as a PowerShell, press play in your ISE or something, and away you go. You need to pair your SBCs with Microsoft Phone System. So a little bit of an eye chart here, but it's new CS Online PSTN gateway, the FQDN that you've used for the certificate, the signaling port, the session count, and there's a bunch of other parameters you can also set, but that is the kind of minimum line you want to do. Sort of call history, media bypass is optional, of course. But there's a bunch of other parameters in there as well. And this list is going to grow as well with some new features that are coming down the line. You need to configure your SBC for direct routing. So this is a little screenshot from an AnyNode SBC, but audio codes, Ribbon, Oracle. There's a large list of devices that are supported. This just happens to be one that I had access to. What you can see is that when Teams connects to your SBC, it actually connects to some transport connections, and it actually connects to 3 different ones. So SIP is the kind of universal one. SIP2 and SIP3 are your failover and your kind of last resort type of thing. It's actually connected to all 3 at the same time, which means that if the nearest one to you in your region goes down. So for instance, I'm in the UK, I'm going to connect to the one in Europe, and my backup will be the one in North America. And my, if everything goes down and all I've got left is APAC, I'll connect to APAC as well. It just means that the SBC is always connected to Teams, which is great. And behind the scenes, Microsoft use some load balancing and traffic connections and things like that to try and make sure that your SBC is connected to the right regions, and your failover and all that kind of stuff is all built in. You need what are called PSTN usage records. Actually, the catch-all is the Microsoft Phone System's voice stuff, and the first thing is PSTN usages. So PSTN usage is a link between the voice policy and the voice route. Voice policy determines where you can call, and the voice route determines how you make that call. So actually, the route that your actual call takes to phone the number that you phoned. So in my case, it would be an SBC. You can be very granular with this and set up PSTN usages for local, national, international, mobile numbers, premium rate, and all that kind of stuff. You can be very granular with how you let people actually make calls. So this example is a PSTN usage where I've actually got different usages for each of the different categories. And then you need what are called voice routes. And again, the voice route is basically your SBC. Again, you can be very granular here, and you could set up a voice route for each of the PSTN usages. And then you point it at your SBC, you give it some number patterns, which is, kind of regex type stuff. You can also use Ken Lasco's fantastic tool to complete all this. The UC optimizer, is it? Or you can just do a simple catch-all. So basically, anything for the UK, any number pattern always goes through that SBC. So it depends on how granular you want to be, and you've got the options there. Then you need to enable your users for direct routing. So, I'm just going to pause really quickly. So at this point, your Teams tenancy is connected to your SBC. You've got some PSTN usages, which will allow people to call certain places. You've got a voice route that actually points those calls at your SBC. And now all you do is, UC dial plans. Thank you very much, Thomas. He's been doing this tool for such a long time that he's changed the domain a few times. I think it was called Link Optimizer when I first started using it around the kind of end of OCS and beginning of Link 2010 days. So at this point, your users are able to make calls. All you need is to be able to allow users to actually do that. So you just enable them by giving them what's called a voice routing policy. So I've got a little script here that sets everything up for you. So in this case, it creates the voice routing policy. It actually filters all of the PSTN usages for the UK, creates the voice routing policy, and then it actually grants it to a user. You can take this a lot further and collect a list, put it into a CSV, or you can filter it by users in an OU or search tags or departments and all kinds of other stuff. But for this is just signing that policy to a single user. So once this set CS user, making sure they're enabled for enterprise voice, that's really critical. Making sure they're enabled for hosted voicemail is kind of an optional thing, whether they want it or not, and enabling and actually setting their on-prem line URI. And that on-prem line URI is the attribute that actually takes the number from your direct routing connected SIP lines, ISDN lines, whatever their DDI is, and then actually attributing it to the user. And that's how you set it. We're also assuming at this point that user, first.last@ucstatus.com already has the phone system add-on license, but that's what I went through in the beginning. Not sure what E165 is. Tiago, there they go, E164. Yeah, so in this case, it is actually an E164 number, so it's the actual area code, kind of +44 in the UK's case. So again, stopping just there, I'll stop right there. So you've actually got an SBC that's been configured with a certificate. It's connected to Teams. You've got your PSTN usages that allow people to call specific numbers, a voice route that actually allows or tells the so when the user actually dials, what SBC it actually uses to make those calls, and you've assigned the voice routing policy to the user. You've enabled them for enterprise voice. At this point, they can actually make and receive calls. That's it. Not very much PowerShell here. If you script it all and run it in one batch or something like that, you could probably do this in space of about 5 minutes. Depending on the SBC that you use, obviously there's some configuration there, but a lot of them are wizard based these days. So any node's case, for instance, there's a good wizard. You can kind of go from start to finish as long as you own the certificate already, because you've got to go and request it and verify and those kind of things. But once you've got the certificate, you can run through the wizard and configure your SBC in a matter of minutes as well. So from start to finish, I think I timed myself once and I got it down to like 8 minutes connecting and configuring the SBC, setting up direct routing, and making my first phone call as a user. It's pretty incredible. So with any good phone system, you need some more advanced routing options. So in this case, Microsoft Teams has something called auto attendants and call queues. So an auto attendant is kind of an IVR type of thing. So like a virtual receptionist. I usually kind of say it's, press 1 for this, 2 for that, 3 for the other. In my case, my example, I've actually got, sort of for sales, press 1, for support, press 2, etc. And this is a way you can actually bring calls in. You can assign a phone number to this auto attendant and then actually route calls based on the number choice. And the great thing about the Teams auto attendants versus the response group service in Skype for Business is that you can pretty much have unlimited number of layers. If you really want to piss off the users that are calling, you can have press 1, 2, 3, and then they press 2, and then there's press 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you could go on forever and ever and ever if you really want to. I think the airlines are actually starting to use that now to kind of hide behind all kinds of layers so they don't have to give any money back. So sorry, airlines, but no bueno. You can also route an auto attendant. You can route an auto attendant to a call queue, an operator, a specific person. So you can, sort of press 1, it'll go to a specific person, for instance. You can nest another auto attendant, a call queue, to actually queue the users for a group of other users, or the callers for a group of users. And what's new as well is you can also route an auto attendant sort of out of hours to a voicemail service. So in this case, it actually uses a voicemail-enabled Microsoft Exchange online group. I'll kind of go through that in a little bit as well. But you can actually leave them into a shared voicemail box, and then you can give a specific number of users access to that group in Outlook, and they can go in and manage those messages, play them back, and that kind of thing. And then there's a call queue. So a call queue is a fancy name or a Microsoft term for a hunt group. And you can queue a caller for a group of agents. You can put in individual users. You can actually have a Microsoft 365 group, a distribution list, a combination of all of those. You can have multiple distribution lists, multiple groups and users, and you can decide on how things are routed. So you can say, sort of they're routed for the person that's been idle the longest, for instance, or the next person that becomes available, or it just rings everybody in at the same time, kind of, or round robin. Sort of the choice is really yours. So what do you need for an auto attendant call queue? Obviously, you need the phone system add-on license in your tenant. That's a given. Obviously, you're going to add that to your users anyway. And if you want a phone number, you need another special license, which I'll go through in a sec as well. So how do you set them up? So what you need, the first is something called a resource account. And this isn't something that you can confuse with a resource account in Exchange that is used for equipment or room mailboxes, that kind of thing. It's probably needs a new name, but it's called a resource account. It's a contact that lives in AD that is really just used to assign a phone number to, in this case for auto attendants and call queues. It's also, sort of a reference point, so that when you are pointing, let's say, an auto attendant to a call queue, or actually just referencing, or you just want to call the auto attendant itself, resource account has, for lack of a better name, a SIP address that you can actually make a call to. When you create your resource account, you need to specify whether it's an auto attendant or call queue, and that's determined by, as it says here, the application ID. So there's 2 different application IDs. This could probably be a little bit easier as well. I mean, nobody needs to know this long string. Why don't they just have, a drop-down list to say that it's a one or the other? Well, actually, they do in the Teams admin center, but I don't use that for very much. I actually set up everything in PowerShell typically, as you could probably tell by now. And then call queue has a slightly different string, or actually a vastly different string. Now you create your resource account. So in this case, it's an online application instance. You give it a user principal name, which is your SIP address, if you like. You can be as descriptive as you want there, or just have something simple. You give it a display name so that when you do actually call that in Teams, that actually comes up and shows you that you're calling that display name. Also, when you receive calls and you're in the queue for that, it actually displays that display name in the actual the call toast. And of course, you give it an application ID. In this case, it's an auto attendant. And then when you run it, it actually comes up with the parameters that have been set. Then you create one for your call queue, or in my case, it's multiple call queues. So I've got one for the sales call queue, one for the support call queue, and one for the customer service call queue. So I've created 3 different ones. As you can see the SIP address I've chosen, kind of RA, so resource account, CQ for call queue, and then it's the name of the actual queue itself, sales, support, or services, and then a unique display name. And again, you just run these, and away you go. You also need to license a resource account. So a resource account that has a phone number needs a license. When Microsoft first announced and launched these, it needed kind of an E1, E3 phone system, E5, that kind of thing. You could tell it was going to start getting expensive. And then not long after, a month or so after, they launched a free license, which is called the Phone System Virtual User License. You can obtain these from the Admin Center. The number of phone system virtual licenses you can get is determined by the number of phone system license add-ons you have. If you've got one phone system, then I think you can get, it's something like 10 or 12 phone system virtual user licenses. But if you've got lots of them, then you can obtain multiple. And to be honest, you're probably not going to need, a huge number. I guess it depends on the size of the company and how many resource accounts you have that are actually enabled for a phone number. But again, to be clear, you only need this license on a resource account that has a telephone number, whether it's a Microsoft service number or whether it's a direct routing number. You also need to specify the usage location for the resource account before you can assign a license to it. And this is the same as sort of assigning a license to a user. There has to have a usage location to be able to assign a license. And if you haven't done it, you'll get an error message to say that it wants a usage location. So I've actually just built one, kind of all-encompassing script, some variables, the location. It's a 2-digit code for wherever your location is, the UPN to actually insert in there. And then, so what it does is it actually sets the account, gives it that location that you've set as the variable, and then it assigns a license. So in this one, it's just getting the account name and the license type, and I've basically just filtered it by name, phone system _ virtual user, and then it actually sets it on the user itself and adds the license. Pretty spiffy and quick. And again, you can bring in kind of a bunch of resource accounts and filter it and assign licenses to all of them if you want to. In this case, it's just a single one. And then you assign a phone number to a resource account. So I had an early blog post on this, and it's basically become a forum for questions since I wrote it. Last count, it was something like 60 comments just on this one. And effectively, what's happened is when it first launched, you assign a phone number, and it could be minutes, could be hours, it could be days, and in some case weeks before you can actually phone that number. And what you get is the telltale kind of 404 kind of number not recognized type of thing. And it's because when you assign the phone number, and I'll show you how to do that. So set CS online application instance. So again, you've used the UPN from a variable above in a previous script, and then you give it an on-prem phone number attribute. In this case, it's the +44207, etc. So what happens when you actually run this command is it actually tells Microsoft, hey, I've got this phone number. Can you add it to the known list of numbers that you hold, what's called the business voice directory? And it takes a little while. There's, Teams, if you know anything about it, it's a vast collection of microservices that are spread over, sort of every continent across the globe. I couldn't even tell you how many thousands of servers and things that it actually is. And, these things take time to actually spread around the world and become completely added to this BVD or business voice directory. So sometimes there's this lag between when you set the phone number and being able to actually call it. And, I've had it be as short as, a minute or two, and I've had it be as long as 3 weeks, and needing a support case with Microsoft, and they needed to do a back-end sync or remove an attribute or sort of clean something up to actually make it happen. These days, typically about a few minutes to 24 hours, and if it hasn't happened in 24 hours, that's the kind of the magic cutoff time where Microsoft recommend if you haven't had any joy in 24 hours, then you raise a case and they'll look at it on the back end. If you get some sort of first line kind of friction there, then go and insist. But they're pretty good at actually setting and clearing these things that actually make this work. Another little bit of advice here, and this is really, really friendly advice: never, ever, ever, whatever you do, change a phone number on an existing resource account, because if you look at this resource account back here, actually I don't know where it was. Oh, there it is. You can see all these attributes that are there: the run space ID, object ID. All of these GUIDs are actually what ties this phone number, which is displayed there, to that actual user principal name, and all kinds of mechanisms to make it work. But if you try and change that phone number, the phone number then needs to be added to the BVD, and then all those attributes need to kind of be correlated and tied together. And we don't have access to that as admins. It's only Microsoft that can kind of do it. But I've heard horror stories where you try to change the phone number and it kind of never happens. So if you can help it, don't change the phone number. Hopefully that's going to change at some point. Hopefully there's going to be a way to actually manage those phone numbers. Maybe if you're if you know Skype for Business or Link before it, there was the unassigned number policy, so you can actually put in your batch of numbers, your DDI range, and those become known numbers to the system. And then from there, you can actually point those numbers at various things like an announcement service. So Bob has left the building or is retired. I'm going to transfer you to Betty on reception or something like that. So hopefully that kind of thing is going to be added to the Teams Admin Center, a way to actually put in your list of numbers so that you can kind of chop and change them and do what you want. But for right now, it's you add it, you set it, and hopefully forget it. And then you create your call flows. So now you've got a resource account with the phone number. You create the auto attendant and some call queues. So they're created in the Teams Admin Center. So go to the Teams Admin Center, expand voice, and then you've got call queues and auto attendants there. But first, you need to create some Office 365 groups. And these are kind of the containers for the users that are in your call queue list or call queue lists. So in this case, you just go to the Admin Center, you add a group, and then you can add some members. In this case, it's Luke Skywalker. Don't try and call Luke. He's not a user anymore. And I mean, he's not a user anymore, so it'll go nowhere. So, and then for that, I've got a little bit of a demo. This is actually using the old UI. I haven't had time to kind of delete all the call queues and create them with the new UI. Thank you, Yvonne. I really appreciate it. But this is a little bit of a run through. So go into the Teams Admin Center, go to voice, call queues, add a call queue, give it a name. You add the resource account. That's the pointer that goes there. You have to type in three letters. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually give you the full name, so it's kind of hard to figure out what it is. You hover over it and it gives you that. You add some call agents or a list of users to actually call. You choose the routing method and the timeouts and all that kind of other jazz, and then you press save and then you repeat. So in this case, it's the support call queue. And you can see you can have music on hold, you can have greetings, so thanks for holding for the sales call queue, etc. Choose your routing method, etc. Timeout handling. I don't know why the default is timeout handling to disconnect the call. Nobody wants to be hung up on if it's taken too long for you to answer their call, but it defaults to that. So just be mindful. You can have overflows to other groups or that kind of thing. So now you've created all the call queues. So now you need to create your auto attendant. In this case, I'm just going to create one auto attendant that has the choices for actually routing the call to those 3 different queues. So again, open the Teams admin center, expand voice, go to auto attendants, press add. And then from there, you give it a name. You decide if you have an operator, so it's a kind of a press 0 option. You give it a time zone, a language, decide whether you want voice prompts. You decide whether you want a greeting, so you can have a file, so you can actually have a professional record something and then you can import that in, or you can actually do what I'm doing here, which is just text to speech. So you type in some stuff and then Microsoft have a default voice somewhere that actually reads out whatever it is you type there. Then you have the prompt menu, which is slightly different from the greeting. So the greeting could be, thanks for calling, company name. And then the prompt menu is, sort of you're telling the users what to press to actually route to the call queues. So then you just add them one at a time. So, press 1 goes to a voice app, and then you search for the resource account. Again, that SIP address pointer to actually point to that call queue. And then you add 2, another voice app, and then the pointer. And then 3. And that's it. So you can also see there's a column there for voice command. So the voice command, you can actually type in, what you are expecting the caller to say, so they can press 1, or for accessibility purposes, you can actually expect the term customer services. So sort of press 1 or say customer services to route to customer services, that kind of thing. The next step is you decide on your opening hours or business hours. So this is the kind of in hours call flow. So in your normal business hours, it's going to follow this path. So once you've got all that, again, you can sort of choose to play and to set up some after hours stuff. So again, you can have a greeting, we're closed, leave a message, or route to somebody else or another time zone, that kind of thing. You can add holidays. So I always add Arbor Day, just as a little joke, but in this case, I've actually got some the resource account. So the resource account with the phone number that actually has the routing point, and that's it. You'll see it in the list. But you've set up auto attendants and call queues. So that's the session. So what did I show you? So the actual voice options in Teams. So calling plan, if you're in a country that has them and you want to spend a bit more money, maybe, versus direct routing. I told you what direct routing is, what you need to make it work, and how to set it up. which you saw was, a few lines of PowerShell, pretty simple. How to set up your auto attendants and call queues, and actually what they are, and all the configuration steps. So in this session, if you actually were following along like an old Julia Child cooking episode, you could have been setting up your Microsoft 365 tenant for calling. You could have a full-fledged phone system, assuming you have a session border controller, of course, as well. And that's it. So again, a little reminder. So I'm Randy Chapman, MVP. You can get me on randy@ucstatus.com if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer them. You can catch me on my blog. You can DM me on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn as well. I get a lot of questions through LinkedIn, and I try my best to answer them. And if you've got a phone with a camera, you can scan that QR code to actually go through to my website and maybe give a little favorite or share it or something like that. It'd be much appreciated. What I found is that the traffic to my blog has increased quite a lot, and I can probably say the same for all the other MVPs and other bloggers that are on in this session and other sessions. 2,500 kind of views a day, 30,000 a month or something like that, because everybody in the world is using Teams and wants to know how to use it, how to actually set things up and things like that. So I think this is going to get even bigger. So it's a good time to be a blogger. Then the last session, of course, another QR code. Please give me some session feedback, good, bad, indifferent. It doesn't really matter. I'd love to hear from you and what I could do to make the session better if I do it again. And don't forget to attend more sessions. So we've got some more sessions coming up. We've got Chris Horde, Adam, and Vescu coming up after my session in this room, and we've got some other sessions in the other rooms as well if voice and meeting rooms isn't your thing. Don't forget to show your love for my session, everybody else's sessions, and the actual conference itself, which has been superbly organized by the organizers. And of course, don't forget to watch the keynotes later. So we've got some heavy hitters in the Teams world. So Caruana and Visa doing some sessions, obviously from the Seattle time zone. But don't forget to watch them as well. Okay, and that's it.